Oh man. Movie of the year. First off, let me just get to the thoughts that I had going into the film. You know, all over the place for the past couple weeks, we've been thrown these ideas from critics, from journalists, from media personalities, or writers that are verified on Twitter at 9,000 followers for some strange reason, telling us that this movie is going to be extremely dangerous, that it's going to spark a ton of violent ideologies, that it's going to essentially create mini Jokers in a way. And I gotta say that the reaction that a lot of critics and writers and bloggers have had towards this film prior to its release have somewhat made me think that it was going to be this crazy, very brutal, very harsh experience when watching the film, and that wasn't what happened at all. It goes back to the rhetoric that people have been using for years and years and years when it comes to blaming video games, movies, television, fighting, any kind of thing that you can access that's supposed to give you some form of entertainment is blamed as to the reasons and the motivations for why people do what it is that they do. The thing I like about the way the city Gotham is portrayed in the film Joker is it doesn't have all of that, doesn't really have too many forms of entertainment other than what the film gives itself. For example, one of the bigger forms of entertainment in this film was comedy, not necessarily movies or video games. So what was going on in the city was directly influenced by politicians, was directly influenced by the society, by the people. So that by the time we got to the end of the film, when the Joker was inspiring that mass crowd, it essentially led to society being responsible for the current conditions of society. Meanwhile, over here in the real world, those places that a lot of us get our entertainment are still being blamed for violence that happens in the world as opposed to the society that quote unquote failed them. The first few things that I absolutely loved with the film were the therapy sessions and how little progress it seemed that the Joker was making with his therapist's aid. From the first visit to the second, he seemed to have made a noticeable jump, not necessarily in a good or bad direction at the time, but just a jump. Some form of momentum. It seemed that Arthur was coming to some greater understanding of himself, meanwhile his therapist still was at square one. It's at this point and at many other points in the film where we find Joker and Arthur living with one another. When we see his notebook, you can almost tell that there's a difference noticeably in the handwriting, almost as if one is intentionally more flamboyant, more characteristic, a lot more bold. One's much more confident and carefree, stands out a lot more than the other. When the funding got cut for that program and ultimately ended his connection to medicate himself due to the mishandlings or what may have you of Gotham's budget, it immediately reminded me of things like Flint, Michigan, the opioid crisis, or people where they're not able to get the things that they need in order to sustain. I know a lot of people feel like we live in a world where you should just work and constantly give to the society that you're in without ever getting back, but to me that just isn't realistic or normal. The way the film starts off with Arthur getting into this clown getup, trying to force himself to smile while he's clearly crying, leading into him holding up a sign for a business that's closing, which leads to him getting jumped and robbed, from him taking care of his mother to doing all these odd jobs where the payment isn't ever necessarily explained. And I do think that that is interesting given how much Arthur seems to value making others happy. It seems as though when he's doing these jobs, though to the common eye it makes sense that he would be getting money or getting paid for his services, for me it looks like he's doing it just for the enjoyment or the satisfaction of maybe if I do really well this time they'll give me the acknowledgement, maybe they'll recognize his existence. He does at one point in the film say that at a time he didn't know if he was actually alive. There are many moments in this film that are extremely humiliating, that are extremely dehumanizing, that ultimately make you feel for the character that isn't necessarily too sappy, too predictable, or too emotional. All of these things to me are done to help you empathize with the character, but not necessarily to understand him completely. I have seen many people take the approach of saying, oh, I completely understand and empathize with the Joker, and I don't really think that was the point of the film. And that's not where I was. I don't know what it's like to have personality disorder. I don't know what it's like to have schizophrenia. I don't know what it's like to be bipolar. I don't know what it's like to have a narcissistic disorder. And I'm not going to pretend to just so I can make myself feel like I'm understanding Arthur a bit more. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I think it's great that we all enjoy the film. I think it's great that we can all empathize with the character Arthur. But let's not pretend like we've ever been where he's been. And let's not pretend that we're ever going to understand him. Because we won't. And that's the idea. We're We're not supposed to understand Arthur. He's not a character, in my opinion, that's meant to be understood in the context of the film. He's a character that's meant to be studied. Because at least to me, it seems as though society failed him in more than just one way. And another way that they failed him was having a lack of information about his symptoms, a lack of information about his diagnosis, whether it came to his therapist, whether it came to the city that didn't have the budget to fund his therapy sessions and his medication, whether it came to the society that was overlooking him every time something bad happened to him, whether it came to Murray not having the nuance of this person that he wanted to use for the sake of a bit. We can look at the character and feel sorry for him, but understanding him, I think you're giving yourself a little too much credit. He wasn't a character that was put on display to be understood. He was a character that was put on display to bring awareness. And when he fully transitions and accepts the form of the Joker, he uses that as an opportunity, Murray's platform, to bring awareness to the character Arthur. At the end of the day, if as many people understood the character as they say, I don't really think the movie would have ever been made. This movie also doesn't do much hand-holding, as in the beginning of the film during the first therapy session, we're brought into Joker in this insane asylum. We're also reminded of that same insane asylum at the end of the film, hinting towards the idea that this entire thing might have been fabricated. However, I would like to say that it's probably not the case, given that the Joker did actually have experiences that can be validated in the real world. It doesn't hold your hand when it comes to this condition that the Joker has where he laughs at random moments uncontrollably. It's hinted at while he's being investigated that it might not be real or it might be a part of his act, but there are many moments in the film where it seems as though the laughter gets painful. And I love the parallel between the two, laughter and pain, where it seems as though the laughter is an immediate result of something painful or uncomfortable that's happening to him. When it comes to trying to entertain or humor a child on the train, to his confrontation in the bathroom with Thomas Wayne, to his confrontation in the middle of the night with those three guys, to the revelation that he's actually adopted, it seems as though the laughter comes as an immediate response to his pain. The moments in the film where he dances, it's almost like a character trying to get out of itself. Right after he defends himself from those three people, you're immediately hit with the sensation that he was justified, but immediately after, when you see him dancing in the bathroom, you realize this is extremely disturbing. These aren't the actions of someone who, although justified, feels bad about what they just did. And in hindsight, was he actually justified in taking out that last guy that he literally chased down and shot twice in the back? The only reason so many people say it's justified is because the three dudes themselves were just trash human beings, which makes it easier for you to think that Arthur is in the right. Morally, you just feel more comfortable with them being trash human beings as opposed to them being innocent bystanders. The dancing to me is somewhat reminiscent of an insect molting, like a new form coming out of an old shell. And we very much so get these slightly altered versions of Arthur whenever he does something traumatic or something that should be viewed as important. The refrigerator scene is symbolic to me of a character that's going down a colder, darker path. We don't get to see what's inside the fridge, but he removes everything and goes into this cold, dark, empty place. This never-ending or huge void that's reminiscent of what's going on inside of himself. So in some capacity or some weird way, he gives himself more comfort by pretending that that world actually exists and he's in it as opposed to it being in him. I love how a good portion of the film is based in these lies and misunderstandings that he's been forced to live out. The lie of having to be happy all the time, the lie of having to force a smile when you don't feel it, the imagination, aka misunderstanding or lie of his romance with the woman in the complex, the lie of his mother being his mother, the lie of his father being his father, the lie of having these set rules when it comes to being a comedian. All of these things at one point in the film are preventing him, holding him back, or restricting him from acknowledging who he actually is or acknowledging what his life has actually been. One of the few things that is absolutely undeniably true, almost, in this film is his admiration and acknowledgement of Murray. How he so desperately and would love to be a part of or on his show. We're almost led to believe that Arthur is going to off himself on Murray's show, but he ultimately ends up using Murray as an example. He uses Murray as the physical manifestation, as the final thing that's chaining him to his former self. The way Phoenix portrays the Joker in this film is unlike anything I've ever seen portrayed before. And this isn't taking anything away from Heath Ledger's performance as Joker either, but people who are saying these things, oh, one's preferable to the other, have to understand that these two things take place in two completely different moments in the Joker's lifespan. One takes place in a more solidified, confirmed version of who the Joker is, whereas the other is an origin story that needs to be performed the way it's performed for us to kind of get a deeper look into who he is. Simply saying that there is no Joker in The Dark Knight without Joker in the origin story. Both interpretations are necessary. The biggest slap in the face in the film is how Joker ultimately ended up inspiring a different version of what would end up giving him the biggest problem later on, Bruce Wayne. When I first saw him walking up to Bruce, I was like, oh God, that's Bruce! That's his little brother! But then I thought immediately after, isn't that a little too convenient? Isn't it just a little too easy? Arthur immediately believes his mother, because what reason is there for you to not believe the person that's made you believe that they're the ones who brought you into the world? Another lie that is constraining him to the personality of Arthur. Another reason for him not to let go. Another reason for him to hang on to the person that he thinks he is. While it seems that the revelation of him being adopted might be the most painful thing in the film for him, it's also the most releasing. At this point, he has nothing left attaching him to the character Arthur. He can fully embrace the character Joker now. His mother's not really his mother, which ultimately means that the lies she told or misinterpreted, or the narcissistic disorder that took over, he no longer has a connection to Thomas Wayne. He was fired from his job. He no longer has a connection to the workforce. He has nothing tying him to love, as his romance life was just another figment of his imagination. The one thing that he still has left is his dream and his want to inspire others through comedy, through humor. The one thing he still has is the experience of Arthur, but he doesn't necessarily have to keep the identity. He uses the experience he has as Arthur as the motivation for what's going to be his humor going forward. And as he fully embraces the Joker, him having nothing else to lose, he uses Murray as an example. Though I do think that there are strong bits of narcissism in Joker, in Arthur's design, I do think that Arthur disassociates himself from his former self so much that he ultimately ends up thinking he died. When he's sitting on that stage, it's almost like he's advocating for a person that the society that he lived in killed, saying, you did this to him, you did this to him. He's fighting for himself, but he's no longer him. As he fires the trigger, he's not firing the trigger for Joker, he's firing it for Arthur. But that's not who he is anymore. It's almost selfless and selfish at the exact same time. That isn't saying that while watching this film, you're supposed to completely be on the side of the Joker. I mean, there are two sides to this coin. He inspires people to be exactly like him, and he also inspires people to be the exact opposite and take the path of trying to better the world, but in a different way. The society that he criticized and ridiculed so much for being the way it was, the riots that he inspired, were all built on the idea of being lost, forgotten, and uncared for. You also have to understand and acknowledge that Arthur didn't just get to this point at the start of the movie. They want you to understand that he's been this way for the entirety of his life. The society that he lives in mirrors the society that he entered the world in, abandoned by his parents and then lied to by strangers all over the place, taken in by some woman that doesn't actually have any blood connection to you, calling herself your mother, letting you be abused, letting you be hurt, being raised off the foundation of this lie that it is your obligation to care for and nurture and give the love back to this woman that never ultimately gave it to you. This is built up over the course of 30 to 40 plus years. He didn't just get this way at the start of a movie. Even though I know it's all a film, it's really made to make you understand that this didn't just happen over the course of a couple days. That being said, the movie isn't trying to tell you the Joker is right. It's okay to become like the Joker. It's okay to do what the Joker's doing. Actually, one of my biggest problems with the film is how easy it makes the Joker's decisions in the film. The moment where he's in self-defense mode and he has to take out these three guys that are on the attack against him for what seems to be no reason, being used as fodder to help us understand why Arthur does what he does. Him grabbing up Alfred at the gate as a representation of him being sick of being given the runaround. Him disposing of his former co-worker because he for some reason had the motivation to lie on him. Where does that motivation even come from? It just seems like easy just to make him snap a little bit more. These are all moments in the film that I kind of cringe at when I'm looking at them, because I'm like, it's really easy to be on his side in this instance. You're not putting him in a position where he really has to make a hard choice, like where he's in that woman's apartment and it's clear that everything that he's made up over the past couple weeks has been a lie. Though I understand the reality and the anger that he was going through when it came to the revelations about his so-called mother, Why wasn't it accompanied with a bit more turmoil when it came to making the decision to take her out? Again, it's easy to be on the Joker's side morally in this instance when it comes to being angry at her, but not necessarily when it comes to taking her out. But all of these moments where he does commit a heinous act are accompanied with this dark sensation that make you realize, yeah, what he did might have been justified, but at the same time, him doing it kind of seems creepy because he seemed to get some kind of enjoyment or some kind of kick out of it. It seemed to satisfy him in some way that it wouldn't a normal person. Even at the end where he takes out Murray, it was another death in the film that I felt, yeah, I saw this coming, but at the same time, is it really justified because he made fun of you in a bit? But I do have to give the film credit at that point in the film for making such a clear message when it comes to the transition from Arthur to the Joker, as Murray's death wasn't necessarily being used as some kind of moral obligation to Arthur, but kind of a necessary step in the forwarding of the world that the Joker wanted to see. I do like how the film really emphasizes the idea of being the change that you want to see, whether or not the main character specifies what that change is or not. As I said, the direct result of his actions end up creating Batman. This is also the first time I think I've watched a DC movie that I was interested in for its character development. Now, I don't normally go to Marvel for any kind of good superhero movie or any kind of good protagonist film, as most of them are generally pretty cheesy. Even Endgame, the one that people love so much, was built off of nostalgia and experience with the film of the Avengers. I get that. Cool. You be sappy over there. DC has generally bored me when it comes to making their characters seem interesting or compelling. Though I do appreciate how they make that more of a priority in their films, their settings are usually so boring and dark that I can't really get into it or feel that much for their characters. But this one, even if I didn't agree, even if I didn't understand, I was just forced to take it in. I was just forced to experience it. The possibility that I feel like I have to question everything that the Joker is doing in the film, because as it seems in the film, he isn't that reliable when it comes to giving concrete information. At the end of the day, the entire movie could have been a figment of his imagination. I also think there are moments in the film that we underappreciate because we're so latched onto the seriousness of it. There are legitimately funny moments here, like when Arthur drops the gun in the children's hospital, or when he punches out and literally punches out, when he scares the guy running by and then the dude can't reach the lock on the door. The fact that he's running after these teenagers in clown shoes is hilarious. Despite it not actually being real, the initial conversation that he has with the woman that comes to his door asking if he followed her, where he says, I actually have a gun, I could come back and rob you tomorrow. I like how the Joker loses that urge to laugh in moments where he feels uncomfortable or pain, because I genuinely think that that was another fabrication and another defense mechanism that he was using to kind of shroud himself or shroud his life, so that he didn't have to face it in the same way that a normal person would. Because by the time we get to the point of him acknowledging the Joker as his main presence, he's not laughing anymore. If he does laugh, it seems to be out of some kind of sarcasm or mocking the person who said whatever they said. You can tell by the tone of his laughter when Murray was speaking that he didn't actually find what he said funny at all. He seemed a lot more calculated and clear with what he wanted to do after he took on the role of Joker. All of the Joker's methods, to me, act as a tribute to the dead character Arthur. Arthur, in my opinion, dies when he kills his mother, or this so-called mother. And when he essentially gives Arthur that funeral, I feel like the remainder of his actions are in complete defense of the life that Arthur lived up till that point. The anger that he has because of the character's life, the tragedy of Arthur, the way he had to live, the awareness that he wants to bring, which is why Murray was used as an example, why he wanted to use that platform to tell people what society did to this dead character, and the motivator to his followers so that they don't have to relive what Arthur did. Don't live like Arthur. Don't live under lies. Don't live under what you're supposed to do. Do whatever it is that you want to do. Don't live under rules. Imagine if we just got an hour and a half to 2 hours of the Joker. Way less compelling of a story, way less of a reason to understand the character, way less of a reason for him to have any of the motivations that he has, just a character that seems much more insane. Which is why a lot of people who were in love with Heath Ledger's performance preferred Phoenix's performance here, because we got some nuance. We got some information, we got reasons why. Still, Heath Ledger did such an amazing job with The Dark Knight. Even still, with the lack of story that they gave him in that film, he was still able to detail so much of why the Joker responded to things the way he did. Batman and the Joker are born on the same day. I know the film paints it as if they're not related at all, but it's almost like they're twins, but just doing life parallel to one another. Different methods, but inspired by the same thing. There are so many more little subtle nuances in the film and little bits and pieces of information that are probably going to be missed, and that will require 2, 3, 4 more watches, I'm sure. I think the most annoying part of the Joker's origin story, though, is the fact that we're probably not going to get a sequel film, because we technically already got the sequel film like 10 years ago. So yeah, Joker was a pretty good experience of a film for me. While there were parts of the film that I thought were weaker than others, it just wasn't enough to take away from the star performance from Phoenix and the overall motivations and thoughts behind the Joker. The scores were perfectly placed, the suspense was building beautifully. It was a great experience for me. It was a great film. I really enjoyed it. I would encourage anyone who's watching to go watch it. If you have watched it already, watch it again, and that's how I'm feeling. Thanks, but I'm gone.